Welcome back, Maria and Kristin. It's so good to have you. I am so freaking excited about this book. Oh my goodness. Not only is it gorgeous, the great menopause myth, and we're going to get into what those myths are and the really big one that I think every woman deserves to know. But first, I mean, you are some of my go-to menopause experts and have lived it. You are helping women live it. And I know that you've had other careers in the past and other focuses. How did this become the focus for you?
Gosh, gee. So Maria always had it, if we're honest, she always had a dream of writing a book or doing a TED Talk. Those were kind of like these things that she just kind of didn't want to end this space of her time not doing. And I was like, Maria, we have no time to do this. We literally cannot fit this in because we're proud of the fact that we're not trying to be influencers. We're really in the trenches working with women clinically. We're doing the testing. We meet one-on-one with them. We're coaching them through changes. We're educating them in live real-time sessions and whatnot. And so it just wasn't something that we could kind of shove aside all of our client work, nor did we really want to be perfectly honest, because women need someone to talk to. And, we've kind of made ourselves available for that. So we actually were approached by our publisher and they were like, hey, we've identified you. We want to have a book in this space and we'd like you to be the ones to write it. First of all, Maria and I were like, is this real? We didn't know it really worked that way. And then it became sort of, okay, let's talk about this. And they were on a fairly, I would say, accelerated timeline expectation wise for us. And so our response was actually, this is just, we're going to burn ourselves out if we do it. It's not for us. Thank you so much. Yeah, we said no. And they came back and said, well, just so you, because actually, Marie, what we kind of said was,
we said not now, right?
Yeah. We were like, maybe in 6 months. And they came back and said, no, you misunderstood. We're doing this. And it's either you or someone else. And Maria and I are not like going to take that easily. So we said back to them, look, if you go find someone else who's able to drop everything and write a book for you right now, they're probably not working clinically in this space. So are they actually the best person to write this book? And they were like, okay. So what are you saying? And we're saying, well, what timeline can we all mutually agree on? And so we massaged the timeline a little bit and Maria and I made it work for us. And so that's eventually how we did it. And it really was, we had it in our minds aspirationally, but it was not on our radar for the timeline that we ended up with. But, we're thrilled that we did it. It really did help kind of flesh out a lot of the messaging that we've really been working on with women. And to be perfectly honest, Mariza, working in this space and doing functional testing and having one-on-one time with clinicians is expensive for women. And so we've had a lot of women like, I can't afford it, or I'm not in your country. And so I don't have the same things available to me. And even though we work with women internationally, we recognize the cost issue and some of the barriers to some women in this space. And so we did kind of see the book as an opportunity to just serve more women. And that's honestly what we wanted to do.
And that's what you did. I will always say here on the show in any personal conversation that books changed my life. And after reading this book, I've read it in depth and some parts more than once. I've read every menopause book out there. I've written a menopause book it's so what we need right now. It is so what we need right now. And I want to come out the gate swinging because why not? I'm in East Coast territory with you two right now.
Oh, yeah.
So I want to talk specifically about the great menopause myth. And what I mean by that is the myth that we're not recognizing, we're recognizing that our cycle, our hormones, our HPO axis is the fifth vital sign. And yet, once we get to menopause, naturally, it's okay that we lose it. So let's talk about that, because if I were to have early menopause or premature menopause, that it would really be treated as such that, oh my gosh, she's losing her hormones. We need to get her hormones.
Depending on who you speak to.
But 10 years later, saunter through it. It feels nothing natural about it. Let's just be honest, in a lot of ways no, there's no helping to salvage any of that. There's no hormones for that. Like 6% of us women in the US are on hormone replacement therapy at often very low levels. And so can you talk about that great menopause myth that I think is, gosh, I mean, I knew it, but the way that you framed it, the way that you spoke into it in the book, it was like, it hit me so hard. The travesty of how we are tending to women around the world and in this country.
So I will say that Kristin and I have been doing this for a long time and we haven't pivoted our platform. And I'm not saying people who pivot, I'm not not saying anything negative against them. I only want to point that out to say that this has been our passion for a long time. And it hit me. Now, you know that would you ladies say like the last 5 years has been like
3 years.
big menopause, 3 years groundswell.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because this book came out in 21 and it didn't, you know what I'm saying?
3 years
Like,
ago.
okay, I would say 3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we've been doing this for a lot sooner than than the book came out and the menopause groundswell and all. We've got like doctors focusing on menopause now. And what was the focus seemingly on Instagram and social media, say 5, 6, 7 years ago, was healthy periods and seed cycling and, healthy fertility and things like that. And how the period is a vital sign, which it is, right? And then all of a sudden one day, just after being in the research, I was like, wow, the period is a vital sign, not debating that. But one of the things that nobody is connecting is the fact that when the period is on its way out in perimenopause, when it becomes sporadic, and then when it's fully gone, why is nobody speaking about that as if we are losing the ability to track that as a vital sign and to have the vitality that does go along, not with the period, not with the bleed per se, but what's happening behind the scenes. So that, I don't come up with a lot of good ideas on my own self, to be perfectly honest with you, but I feel like, oh my God, like I just launched onto that and I felt like I saw something and that not everyone was seeing. And then so Kristin and I just kind of really just started developing content on that, and that there's a lot of that is in the book.
Yeah. And I think part of the thing is when women are even maybe are listening now, they're thinking, yeah, it's a vital sign because that means you wouldn't be able to get pregnant. And that's the thing that we want to decouple from the conversation. This has nothing to do with fertility. Nothing.
And it doesn't in the childbearing years either, by the way. I mean,
Correct.
yes, it's connected to that. It's a yes and.
Yes,
right?
Correct. Even if let's say you're a 34-year-old woman and you tragically, whether you need to have ovarian removal or you've got primary ovarian insufficiency and you're suddenly no ovarian production, your doctor doesn't come to you and say, here, I'm going to give you estrogen hormone therapy so that you can still have a baby, because you could say to them, I've already had my kids, or I'm not going to have children, or whatever it may be. They're still going to slap a patch on you. And the reason is because you're going to be osteoporotic before you ever hit 40. So this, again, it's not about fertility. And it is about the fact that, no, I don't think half the doctors understand or recognize all the genomic signals that are happening because of the menstrual cycle, because of the dance of our hormones, because of all that. So when we say it's a vital sign, we need to be really clear that we're not saying a vital sign because of fertility, right? We're really saying it's a vital sign because of whole body health. And that's what we try and lay out in the book, because so many women don't understand it, or they've been sold this myth that all of the things you're experiencing once you start to lose your cycle and hit perimenopause and menopause are just part of aging. And that's where Maria and I are like, time out. This is not about fertility and it's not about aging. This is about the decline of the systems in the body that are heavily dependent upon our sex hormones. And we need to be really be honest with women about that piece of it.
Yeah. One of the things that I really highlighted in the book and that I have believed wholeheartedly that you guys say is that perimenopause sets off an acceleration of events that leads to declining health span in menopause or post-menopause, whatever you want to call it. And I thought that was so profound because yes, that is when we start to, butter out. Our hormones are declining. And because of that, there's an uncoupling that's happening and there's a significant rise in inflammation. And so I'd love for you to speak into that, because what we're talking about here is, yes, aging is happening and this is happening in tandem. So they're running on separate tracks at the same time.
Yeah. We can use men as an example, right? Because men are aging right alongside of us as well. Yeah. What's the difference? Men don't lose their hormones off a cliff the way women do. So they maintain this hormonal milieu that allows them to age in maybe a little bit better fashion. And people say, oh, men have all this heart disease that women don't have and everything. We're like, we actually catch up to them and we exceed them. Like, how many men are walking around with osteoporosis? Not that many, right? It's mostly women.
Dementia.
Yeah. And when you look at the statistics, women may live longer, because we do know that men, may not live as long as women from a longevity standpoint. But our health span, our years of healthy living are much reduced compared to men. And they've looked at, octogenarians and centenarians, men and women together. The women are much sicker, even if they live as long as the men or longer. So that piece of it, I think, is kind of hopefully something that women understand and highlight, that this is not just aging. There's something different going on because we see the differences between the sexes. The other piece is that we focus women on menopause. Like it's this great event, like a marching band's going to come down the street and blow horns off in front of your house and woo, menopause happened. And then you should pay attention. And that's another myth that Maria and I are like, bull crap. That is not the time to pay attention, because what's the first part of the sentence that you just said? The acceleration of this decline happens during perimenopause. Yeah. And so we're frustrated in that the medical communities and these OBGYNs and these NAMS doctors are essentially telling women, if you're still cycling, it doesn't matter. You don't have to worry about it right now, especially if symptoms are low and you still have some semblance of a monthly bleed. This is really, really, really inaccurate information. And it's just, to be honest, Maria and I see it as a level of malpractice, because they're not telling the women what's at stake during this declining period, even when they have some semblance of a cycle.
Yes, I want to dig into that a little bit, because as we've all talked, more kind of connected outside of this, I'm very much in it. I'm in the perimenopause continuum. Let's call it what it is, or the chaos, so to speak. And it's profound, the symptom. And to me, taking care of women for a very long time, like symptoms, that's a red flag. The idea of like, oh, well, you're just kind of going through this little thing and it's aging or whatever it is, and like, we're not edging and on, like, if women are going through it, there's symptoms and there's deep symptoms. Like, I feel like that's the flag we should be looking at. And I get that some women somehow, I don't know how many anymore, I feel like less and less women are sauntering through perimenopause into menopause without symptoms. Right. But as you and I both know, as the three of us know, that systemically they'll never be the same. And so it's just fascinating to me that we've allowed women to suffer unnecessarily during this transition, with solutions of, antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications and an IUD or other forms of birth control. And I just, God, being in it, I'm thinking to myself, like, how was that ever okay? How was that ever viable?
Well, I don't want to impute motive to these doctors, but let's be honest, we have a phenomenal pharmaceutical industrial complex around our medical system that I think there's a certain element of, oh, well, when the sleep loss happens, I'll just give her Ambien. And when the mood, gets bad, we'll just give her Xanax. And when the bones decline, we have a drug for that, the bisphosphonates. Mm-hmm. So I hate to be cynical, and it's not a conspiracy thing, but if we look at how it plays out for the vast majority of women, that is how it plays out. So whether or not they have symptoms, the doctors sort of approach it with, well, we'll Band-Aid that. Not, I will make your life better. God forbid not, let's prevent it from happening in the first place.
Absolutely. Everything's put in a silo. I can't tell you how many times when I was first in practice in 2009, where women, again, in their 50s, coming to me with all these things and treated all in a silo. And I was like, this isn't adding, none of this is adding up, but that's all we had. There was no conversation even around menopause then. And surely there was no hormone replacement in 2009, 2010. Right. Except for the very rare doctors who were still doing it. This was about 10 years after, the big 2002 Women's Health Initiative moment.
Yeah. Well, and Maria, why don't you so Maria, what if I come to you and I say, I don't have any symptoms. I'm in peri, I'm deep in peri. My cycles are maybe every 4 months, but I feel great. I don't have any symptoms.
Well, so if you're a practitioner, I'm going to point you to the seminal article. I think it came out in 2020, but don't quote me on this. It was either Cell or Nature. And it was like perimenopause is really a neurological transition. Mm-hmm. And it talked about neurological, we don't necessarily have symptoms for that, right? We don't see tau protein deposition in the brain. We don't feel or perceive changes to our bone architecture. We don't see plaque deposition in the arteries. We don't feel it.
Right. We don't see insulin resistance.
Right. We don't see it. It could be argued like skin tags or excess weight, but most people aren't paying attention to that. So there's so many things. I spoke to beautiful. I gave books to, just some friends close to me. It's a little home group we go to on Thursday night. And I just saw one of the ladies. I had given it to her husband. She's beautiful. She's 48. She's like, I'm fully through menopause. She goes, my mom went through early, and she goes, so far, so good. She's this beautiful Mexican woman. And I looked at her, I said, Janet, I said, please read the book, because it's really not about symptoms. Yes, of course, like you said, Mariza, symptoms can help us to discern where we are in the perimenopause timeline. And, I never want to get to the point where we completely, disavow or disregard your symptoms, because we need to manage our symptoms, no doubt about that. But we also need to realize that even when we don't have symptoms, there are things happening in the body. And it just breaks my heart, because unless I can get through to this woman who said, I'm 48 and I'm through menopause and so far so good. What will happen is that at 62, she is going, the poop is going to hit the wall, the fan, whatever, and there are going to be problems. And that's when there's going to be, the bone health, very not so good for you, bone health drugs and the statins and maybe the CPAP machine. And it just breaks my heart that there's just such an opportunity for women in their, 40s, 50s, and earlier if need be, if it's premature menopause, to learn about this, to take control of their health. And Kristin and I are not saying HRT is the only thing. By far, it's not. Okay. It has to be paired with other very important, lifestyle habits. But even those lifestyle habits, like I have what I thought was this great post on social, it's like 2 columns. It's like HRT plus healthy lifestyle. And then I have in the other column, it's healthy lifestyle plus bisphosphonates, plus marriage counseling, plus statins. And I want people to think, well, wait a second. Don't choose HRT, right? But I choose the column that's healthy lifestyle. Why are you saying that? Why are the bone health drugs and why are the statins in that? Depends for bladder leakage or what have you. Well, because the sad fact is the most part, and again, this is like where we are right now. We're living in the 21st century, stress, toxins, all that stuff. Healthy lifestyle, you're lucky. If you get through unhealthy lifestyle alone, you're lucky. Most women aren't. They need, that's where HRT really comes in. Healthy lifestyle.
Well, we have a recent study to that effect that came out even after the book, but it was incredibly well-designed study, but it took 2 cohorts of women, all in early postmenopause, none of whom had had any HRT usage within, I think it was 6 months prior, Maria, or something like that. So, they're pretty much at their low point of hormones and production in the body. And they put them through a calorie controlled, macronutrient controlled strength training program. And they, really detailed, physiology lab where they're looking at, contraction and contractile strength and mass and all these things and 1 rep maximum exercise and whatnot. And all they changed between the 2 women, everything else being equal, was 1 got a patch with hormones and 1 got a patch that was a placebo. And shocker, the ones who got the patch with the hormones had better muscular outcomes, both in strength, power, and mass. And, maybe some women are listening and saying, well, I don't want to be muscular. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is the protection to your metabolic health that muscle provides. Mm-hmm. And that hopefully is like a well-worn conversation at this point. We've got some great practitioners out in this space focusing on muscle as your longevity organ. So what we're trying to say to women is, let's say you get in a car accident. You don't have adequate muscle in your body. You're going to have a tough time dealing with the inflammatory processes that are going to come from that challenge, the immune processes that are going to come from you suddenly being laid up, et cetera.
We metabolic issues.
Exactly. Yes. There's so much to muscle beyond locomotion or aesthetics and looking good. So there's just one example where they literally controlled 2 groups of almost identical women under all the different interventions being held the same. All they did was add hormone replacement therapy, and voila, these women had phenomenal outcomes. So it, like Maria said, is it imperative for every woman? No, but this is where we're saying, make your choice from a place of informed consent. Know what you're choosing. At some point, statistics don't lie, you're going to need to rely on pharmaceuticals in order to maintain or slow the loss of some elements of your health. But if you just replaced your hormones and restored that milieu, you actually would avoid those drugs in large outcomes. So that's the part that we're really frustrated with.
Oh, as am I. When by the time women are 45, they are more likely to be overweight or obese than men. They are more likely to be insulin resistant. We're talking mid-peri for most at this point. I wouldn't even say that they're in late peri yet, depending on the person, that we're seeing this metabolic dysfunction play out, and hormones are vastly playing a role here and can vastly protect along with, it's a yes and. It very much is a yes and. And so I want to steer the conversation because you're right. We live in this modern world where we've got a third of our teenagers who are pre-diabetic. So we have a lot of other things playing out here that are affecting our metabolic health. We know that more women than men die of cardiovascular disease. So we know a lot of things are playing out. So we've got this kind of this window, this midlife window to protect our muscle, to protect our strength, to protect our metabolic health. And a big part of this is by supplementing with hormones. If you're a candidate, which hopefully, a majority of women are, I would love to move the conversation around the nuance of hormone replacement therapy, even in midlife, because right now, as it stands, a lot of doctors still feel you need to be ground zero before we give you estradiol. And even for me, who I'm still an early peri, and scouring all the research and scouring what so many people are doing and trying to figure out can I get on estradiol? Is it, and because my FSH is not 25, nowhere near 25, I don't know if I shared it with both of you, but it started at 14 days ago after having 15 to 20 migraines a month in my own personal hell. And I've had only one migraine since. And so, but there was a bit of a fear of like, okay, it's okay for me to be on progesterone, but is it okay for me at 44 to be on estradiol? And obviously thinking that this is like, of all the things I've done this year, the estradiol has literally changed my life, changed my life, gave me my life back. And so I'm not in a pit of hell and despair anymore. And so I want to speak into and I get that everyone's case by case and there's no one size fits all here, but when should we really start having this conversation and giving this strong consideration for women, even in midlife? Because let's just say that women in menopause, it's all systems go. Right.
I'm going to let Maria answer the whys, but I want to point out that in the book, we have a graph that shows that yes, progesterone is the first hormone to fall and it falls fairly precipitously. I believe it's about a 75% drop between ages 35 and 55. But estradiol drops 35% during that exact same window. So the doctors who think all you need to replace is progesterone are completely overlooking the fact that we have this declining estrogen. And I'm going to say Maria will take off as to why the declining estrogen actually changes that progesterone isn't the only player we should be focused on, even in peri.
So a lot of women start with progesterone, Mariza, and that's a viable strategy. Like, as you well know, you probably saw some benefit like early on starting with progesterone.
I got pregnant with it. I mean, I couldn't even get pregnant at 40 years old without progesterone,
And that is a pregnancy drug. That's for sure. That's awesome. But like, for instance, we had a client just today who was mid-50s and hormone test back on her, but also what she said, she had very high progesterone level, not anything wrong with that per se. It just becomes really null and void, like almost like why bother? I mean, actually, sometimes it does have some more negative effects that can kind of cause bloating and maybe some joint laxity. But progesterone so hormones go into receptors, and for progesterone receptors to be made, it depends on kind of concentration of estradiol in the bloodstream. So it's the estradiol that creates the receptor for progesterone. So now you've got a woman who like started maybe at your age, like let's just say you progesterone, and let's just say you were getting close to the 50 and your periods are really sporadic now, and you're like, oh, like this progesterone was so amazing in the beginning, and it's just like it seems to have zero effect. That's because it doesn't have a receptor to go into. So that's the issue with progesterone. It's one of the main ones.
Yeah. So and the estradiol, I mean, there's always a dance. Like, Maria and I will go out on a limb and say we're not in alignment with a lot of the current thinking on this perimenopausal approach with HRT. Because what do we know about the endocrine system, right? It's got this beautiful feedback kind of system between the brain and various endocrine organs, whether it's your thyroid, it's your adrenals, it's your ovaries, whatever. And what that feedback loop means is as we have one part of the system start to kind of sputter and falter, the rest of the system starts to sputter and falter, right? So by going in and just fixing one piece of the system, we actually can accelerate the sputtering and the faltering of the rest of the players in that kind of cycle. And so there's the theory to replacing progesterone or maybe just really low dose estradiol for women is that the ovaries still are doing a little bit of work. So we're just going to augment what they're doing. But the problem is as the ovaries do something and then we add something from hormone replacement therapy, the brain starts to be like, well, what's going on? And we kind of disrupt the system further. So we take it from the approach of, if you're a perimenopausal woman, progesterone may work short term in the interim, but consider full replacement because we need to essentially take over that endocrine system, that whole feedback loop. We need to provide it all of the outputs or inputs that it needs in order to function optimally. And by sort of just touching one piece of an entire system. I mean, any engineer would tell you when you tinker with one thing, there's a whole downstream cascade of sometimes unintended or, undesired consequences. So our point is go in, look at that endocrine system and address all the things, because that enables you to have a much smoother transition through this. Some doctors will say, well, we don't want to do that because she's still cycling.
Yeah.
And that's where some of what we talk about in the book starts to get a little controversial, because does that cycle need to end?
Right. And no, yeah, I know. And I want
Yeah.
to, before we get there, I've got a we're getting there where I've
Yeah.
got an ascension plan here. I do want to step back for a second and I want to address the other elephant in the room, which is up until the last couple of years, honestly, the only thing we were doing for women in perimenopause was one, ignoring them,
Yeah.
two, birth control pills,
Right.
the heavy bleeding, kind of that disconnection, but the HPO axis issues where they were seeing a lot of those kind of, a bit temporarily, like estrogen dominance type of symptoms, right? Where we'd have that HPO dysfunction, and then we have a sputter of estrogen, and then maybe nothing. And so hormones, birth control to kind of shut that whole thing down. We see that. And then
you just hit it though. They're not fixing anything.
No,
they're just shutting it down.
But that's all we have. We're like, well, we can, and really only addressing that piece of the symptoms, no brain support. And so what I'm seeing right now is this approach around give women birth control. And I get contraception and all that. I get it. But then also adding real progesterone, oral micronized progesterone on top of the progestin, because women are still, again, a majority of these symptoms are brain driven symptoms. And so ignoring or hormonal birth control, and then antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications. Obviously the hormonal birth control, if they're not giving you progesterone, then they're addressing the mood changes and those kind of changes with a different kind of medication. And so knowing that we've kind of moved from that over to, at least we're seeing more people going towards progesterone. And I get that it's not good enough. But are we in your mind, are we kind of crawling our way in the right direction?
We're kicking the can down the road.
Yeah, okay.
That's the way I'd look at it. We're kind of kicking the can down the road. And I think what's unfortunate about that is because women are led to believe that here, if you take your oral micronized progesterone, everything's going to be fine. Vast majority of them don't still feel fine. And that's unfortunate, because then they start to question themselves. What is wrong with me? Do I need to fast more? Should I be working out more? Maybe I need to, be eating less. Like they take this as sort of, there must be something broken with me. And we see this play out in the statistics around marriage loss and marriage destruction during this transition of life. Women just suddenly feel like they're angrier, they're moody. I mean, Maria and I joke, but we're not really joking when we say that the 7 sons that we have between us probably could use a little therapy because of how we behaved in our mid 40s. It wasn't pretty sometimes, our tempers were short and we felt very put upon and very stressed out all the time. And I think as women, instead of being taught that this is part of the loss of your hormones, we think that we're broken. And that's really messed up. That's where we get really, really angry with this approach, because it's sort of like, here's a Band-Aid for you. Now, anything else that goes wrong, it's on you, sort of thing. And that's part of what I feel like with progesterone. It might help in the beginning. It stops helping, and nobody pays attention to the woman who's at the center of that storm. And she starts to blame herself, or kind of has a little destruction in various parts of her life. That's just not okay.
Yeah, I feel like I've been that woman, literally that woman. I was that woman. And just like 2 weeks ago, I didn't, barely, that, being a mom to a little one, and coming from child abuse and trauma, and my greatest fear, watching the nightmare of my mother's perimenopause unfold. I mean, she wouldn't leave the house because she was afraid she was literally going to hit somebody with her car.
Yeah,
because she was so pissed and angry and rageful. She just was like, I would just lock myself in the house for 3 days until like the worst of it would subside. And my greatest fear with the trauma and all the things, and seeing some of that start to show up. And how do you not like blame yourself to some degree and be like, okay, I need more trauma therapy. I need more things. The progesterone at 200 milligrams, it sure as heck is not touching this. It isn't. Maybe I do.
No, and I mean, in some people, it actually makes things worse.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Some people have more, they're more sensitive for, for whatever reasons. the mood swings get worse, or the bloating, and some of those symptoms.
And that's because they don't have those receptors, right? I mean, and now we're just like flooding their body with this progesterone, which messes up neurotransmitters, et cetera. And I don't want to overlook another group of women within this demographic, which is those who have corporate jobs or are small business owners, because they're trying to show up not just for themselves, maybe a partner, maybe children, but also these careers. And, if you're in your 40s and you still have a corporate career, you've put a lot of time and investment into that. And to feel as though you can't perform and you can't, do what is expected of you or do what you would like to see from yourself, that shakes a woman's to her core. So it's like, then you add in, if there are also children and there is a partner and everything else, I mean, we literally start kind of this cycle of self-loathing during this period of time, and we isolate. So we stop talking to our friends about it because we're somewhat humiliated and horrified over who we think we're becoming. And again, we're sold this all, it's just aging, and here's a little progesterone for that. And it's such a completely incomplete solution.
I agree. I mean, my podcast schedule now is locked at 2 interviews per day, just in case I can't show up. 5 years ago, I could do 6 or 5 interviews in a day, no problem. And so it's profound. I mean, I will say the brain changes have been so crazy, in early perimenopause for me. But I know that's so often, that's what women recognize, these amazing doctors and colleagues of mine who are like, my brain isn't working. I feel rage at my family, like this is how I knew. And even still, a lot of these professionals who are in this space, everyone's just on progesterone, which again, as you're saying, kicking it down the road. And I'm just saying, well, maybe it's providing some relief in this continuum until that doesn't work, and then you go to the next thing
until it doesn't.
Well, and that's where that's kind of where I was at. I was at that crossroads of like, this ain't cutting it anymore. Like, I don't know how much it actually cut it, but it doesn't cut it. And that's why I wanted to speak to it, because I'm in it. I'm in the lived experience. And I literally, like, I kissed my estradiol like 10 times yesterday.
I love it. Well, you'll pry it out of Maria's and my dead hands. So, I mean, we hear you on that. We're not letting go of our estrogen anytime soon. Yeah.
So I'm glad we talked, because I wanted to speak into this, because I don't know when the tide's going to turn on this, honestly, in this particular demographic. There's still so many people that feel so solid that you need to be 1 year out.
The women are going to be, we cannot wait for the saviors to come out of the medical community. Even the talking heads within this space, very large platform, OBGYNs and whatnot, they're not going to turn the tide for you. The only people who are going to turn the tide is for the women essentially storming the offices of their medical providers or firing them and finding new medical providers, because there are incredible people out there who get it and who understand that we need to be looking at estradiol as well to not just protect everything that's going on under the hood, but even the lived experience of these ladies day to day. So it's just going to take the ladies uproar, grassroots.
Let's, well, I agree. I mean, suffering women, I'll tell you what, there's no sacred cows in this transition at all. And everything's up for review. And it's mind blowing that we've suffered so long for so many years in these, I mean, 10 years is a long time to be suffering. And then, and if there were no solutions given, I mean, and then it's just a continuum moving forward, I'm so glad that the tide is about to turn, especially just for women who are like, I'm not doing this anymore. So I want to speak into the controversy of hormones, hormone replacement therapy, and how to dose it. It's because right now I'm obviously cycling progesterone. I still have a cycle, 26 days, like clockwork until it's not. And then continuously using estradiol. And so but the recommendation, and I get that everyone's different. I have some, like a friend of mine who's one of my dearest friends in our space. She's like, Mariza, I can't cycle progesterone. I have to do it continuous. She called me and she was like, I've been in this pit of despair. And I was like, girl, she's like, my estradiol's in the mail. I'm like, run to the mailbox. I'm like, start it yesterday. That is what's going to pull you out of this hole. And she's like, and she was cycling it, but she's finding her level of mental bandwidth isn't going well unless she's doing it continuously. And so is there nuance here? I know a lot of people are on the bandwagon of continuous progesterone, continuous hormones. Once you're in menopause, it's game over.
Pretty much everyone is.
Everybody, right?
Yeah.
So
like it's acceptable for you to cycle progesterone because you still,
yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. I'm still of the acceptable
you're
age.
okay.
Yes.
But for people like Kristin and me, cycling it is, oh my God, what are you doing? Why would you not want progesterone for, the benefits of it every single day? And I will be the first to say, like, if like your friend, or for maybe a few reasons why progesterone shouldn't be cycled, if you're happy, fine. But we like to look a little bit deeper into the science, and it's just preserves receptor health, and receptors are everything when it comes to having this HRT not just work now at 43 and 44 and 45, but legitimately having it work for the rest of your life, God willing, should you get to live 40, 50, 60 more years. So
I mean, it's, again, Maria explained, without receptors, progesterone can essentially go south in a woman's body. And if it's working, but then we remove it, is it because we remove the progesterone or because we don't have enough estrogen? I mean, women talk about, let's say, sleep. That's the number one reason why most women say, I have to take my progesterone all the time. Okay, that's great. But progesterone really only helps with sleep initiation. Disrupted sleep, the 1 o'clock a.m. wake ups, the 3 a.m. wake ups, the like busy brain when you have to wake up to go to the bathroom and then you can't fall back asleep. That's low estrogen. That's not low progesterone. What progesterone can do is it has a very, it's a very drowsying effect. You can feel somewhat drugged on it. So I like to equate it when I had surgery once and the doctors were like, here, take this drug so you can sleep. I'm like, this isn't sleep. This is unconsciousness. And that's similar to what progesterone can kind of do. It's not initiating a complete sleep cycle. It's just initiating the beginning of the sleep cycle. But then women can, if you had to get up and, like, let's say, drive a car down the freeway in the middle of the night when you're on progesterone, most women can't do it because we're pretty darn drowsy and out of it. So I want to ask women, like, is it really that the progesterone is what's helping you, or is it because it's masking a sleep problem through its drug-induced effects, and really you're just missing the estrogen? So that's one piece of it. A lot of women do claim to have progesterone intolerances, but Maria and I are always like, okay, but what is your estradiol regimen? Because that's relevant. So some women don't want to take progesterone at all. And that, again, goes to this low estrogen phase. So there's all sorts of things there in terms of why someone might want progesterone all the time or not want it at all. And it usually comes back to the relationship between progesterone and estrogen. So that piece of it, we would say, dig a little bit deeper, ladies, figure out why this is happening. It's not that the progesterone is the end all be all solution for you. There's something else going on. But if you look at the menstrual cycle, I mean, you can find this on any Wikipedia Google image, right? We have this beautiful dance. Progesterone only comes in the second half of the cycle. If we were supposed to have it all of the time, wouldn't the body have done that? I mean, our bodies are unbelievably wise and evolutionary on point. So again, we would like to mimic the cycle, not because of needing a follicle and an egg and a fertility to result, but because of what that dance does from the relationship of estrogen and progesterone. There are certain tumor suppressors that occur when estrogen reaches its peak and then progesterone reaches its peak. There are certain cognitive changes that are dependent upon not having progesterone and then having it introduced in the second half of the cycle. There are certain vascular changes. I mean, we have to think of the kind of endothelium of the lining of the pipe of our blood vessels, right? Think of that similar to the way we look at bones. We know that bones are this living thing that's constantly kind of growing and shedding and growing and shedding. That's how we maintain our bone health. There's a certain element of that cycle within the vascular system of the body too. That cycle depends on certain enzymes and things that have to be present in order to make the vascular walls stay healthy. Well, guess what those enzymes are dependent upon? The dance between estrogen and progesterone, not continuous progesterone, but truly estrogen doing its thing and progesterone coming in and sort of countering that thing. So there's a reason why the body does this. It has nothing to do with the menstrual cycle. The menstrual cycle is one part of it, has nothing to do with fertility. Fertility is one part of it, but the true dance of estrogen and progesterone throughout a 28-day cycle really has to do with these signals that the body receives in order to maintain the health of these different parts. And that's why we have an issue with taking progesterone all the time, because women need to understand there are studies showing there's different vascular health and different plaque deposition and different things that occur when we take progesterone all the time compared to progesterone only 2 weeks of the month. Same thing with
Kristin, why would you do that? You're a postmenopausal woman. Why are you trying to mimic something of a younger woman's cycle?
Because I would like to have the vitality and the bodily functions of my 30s instead of,
But if we're going to do natural, then what would we do?
Die.
Nothing at all.
Right.
Nothing at all.
Right. So that's a great point, Marie, because that is frequently from the chorus of critics.
Oh, from a few OB-GYNs, yeah.
Yeah, from a few OB-GYNs, they'll be like, you don't need to do that. You're in menopause. You don't need to replicate the cycle. We're like, well, you don't need to replace hormones at all then.
Yeah. So let's do it in a way that is so like how the body was made. So
yeah, because we need to recognize why the body does it that way. And again, not menstruation, not fertility, lots of other things at play. So that piece of it. So there's how do we present hormones in the body through our hormone replacement therapy regimen? That's one consideration, continuous or cycled, or then there's some crazy people off the, range that are like, take a break from estrogen. Ladies, your body never takes a break from estrogen. Please, if you have a provider telling you to take a break from estrogen, leave, go get someone else. But the second thing is, are the hormones you're being given able to achieve the levels needed in order to trigger the cascade of signals to keep your body healthy? And this is another area. So we have the continuous cyclic debate, and then we have essentially dosing level debate. And those two things are where Maria and I are going to push back every single time, because you started out by saying, if you were a younger woman and you lost your cycle, you probably still had detectable levels of hormones, notwithstanding having lost your cycle. That lost cycle would be like a freaking fire alarm going off to your medical providers. They would be like, Mariza, we need to address this, right?
Yep.
So if we're looking at levels of hormones, why is it okay to keep a 50-plus-year-old woman at hormone levels that are so low, they're the same levels that the 30-year-old who's losing her cycle has? Why is that okay when it's a fire alarm for one and it doesn't matter for the other? And it's just a huge conversation that needs to be had. And, we're going to disrupt the conversation a little bit. And I like to say, I come from a military background, when you're taking flack, it usually means you're over the target. And for me and Maria, we take a lot of flack, and a lot of it ultimately comes from a place of attacking us for not being licensed prescribers and not having medical degrees. But like, that's great, but could you at least debate the point? Yeah. Stop attacking our credentials and debate the point. We're taking flack because we're over the target, and it's just a very sort of familiar place for a lot of doctors to end up, and they don't want to discuss it. And Maria, what's the other reason doctors don't want to do these things?
They're down on what they're not up on.
Well, and they don't want to manage
a period. Yeah. It's written into medical opinion letters. It's like doctors just have pretty much decided that a postmenopausal woman who is cycling progesterone is not going to want to get a period, which, by the way, brings up something that we're assuming like everyone understands. But if you cycle progesterone as a postmenopausal woman and you have enough estrogen on board to build up the lining of the uterus, you will get a period. Now, that period is supposed to be managed, expected, scheduled, reliable, like it's supposed to come on a 28-day cycle. It is not supposed to be painful and problematic and spotty and happening all over the place. Like, there is a way to get it so that you're getting it approximately every 28 days. And if it is problematic, if you have a practitioner who believes in this, he or she will work with you to figure out, what do we need to do? Do we need to drop or increase the progesterone? Does the estrogen need to be higher? Because that sometimes is a need. So I don't know if we blew any minds by saying that, yes, the uterus will respond to the hormones given despite the age of the woman. This can happen at 65 as easily as it can happen at 45.
Yeah. And then, the prevailing narrative right now is that a woman in postmenopause who bleeds at all, it's a sign of cancer, get her in for a transvaginal ultrasound, have her to undergo a D&C, etc.
Yep.
That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about essentially a bleed that occurs because of the withdrawal of progesterone. It's no different than what they're doing with the withdrawal of the progestins during a birth control cycle, right? So it's the same. And if we're going to accept that the menstrual cycle is a vital sign, if you have a daughter, I know you've got a son, but let's say we all had daughters. None of us do, ironically.
None of us do.
But if we had daughters and she's 19 years old and she's a freshman in college and she's having these debilitating, horrific cycles and PMDD and cramping and can't go to class for 3 days or whatever, we would say there's a problem. What is going on? What can we do? Is it a metabolic health, lifestyle, nutrition thing? Are you drinking alcohol every weekend and you're screwing up your liver? Like, what is it? We would want to investigate. So the same really does apply for a manufactured bleed in menopause due to cycling progesterone. If it's problematic, like Maria said, that's a vital sign. That's telling you something is off. And a good provider says, aha, we need to figure out what's going on. But the vast majority of OBGYNs in this space do not want to deal with that. Right. They're not acting out of your Mariza's best interest. What they're acting out of is, I don't want to deal with these postmenopausal women who are bleeding, so I'm going to stick them on progesterone all the time and call it a day.
But what's the problem with that, Kristin? Daily progesterone.
Well, I mean, what we just said is that we're going to have
bleeding.
Breakthrough bleeding, and the study is clear on that. Yeah, we've had women who've been, they're like, and we get it. It's a choice. Again, this all comes down to make the choice that best fits your goals and your needs. Just understand what you're choosing. I have the ApoE4 gene. I really don't want to end up with like accumulated proteins in my brain and having deposits of tau. So I like to cycle my progesterone. And guess what, folks? I don't even have a uterus any longer. And I still cycle my progesterone.
And you did it before when you had it.
And I did it before, and I didn't have a period for 18 years because of an IUD. And I brought back a period with my hormone replacement therapy by cycling my progesterone happily. But I'm doing it because of the brain benefits. I'm doing it because of these other benefits. And so, with women who think, I don't want to deal with it, my doctor doesn't want to deal with it, whatever the choice is, okay, fine, understand what you're choosing, understand the potential drawbacks, but no, it's not a guarantee that you're never going to bleed. And that's kind of mind-blowing for a lot of women, because the studies show that, what is it, Maria, at least up to 25% of women who take progesterone continuously.
Definitely in the first year, but we've had experiences where women have been years in and they'll just kind of they'll just be spotting.
They start bleeding and they're like, this is worse because I'm trying to be on vacation in Italy and suddenly I'm bleeding. And then I come home and it's, this, and I'm bleeding and I never know when it's going to happen. And then usually Maria and I say, well, you could schedule it
by cycling
your progesterone. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So.
No, I'm so grateful we're having this conversation, and I know the controversy, one about cycling and also about dosage, and I know where the typical allopathic OBGYN doctor lands on this, and the quote unquote fear around any bleeding in menopause. Even that they're trying to mitigate the way that they use hormone replacement therapy to ensure that the bleeding doesn't happen, or if it does, that maybe it's a problem potentially. So there's all this fear. And so I would say that the average woman, again, only 6% of women are even on hormone replacement therapy, because obviously a lot of doctors still think it causes cancer. So we're in that camp still. And then, how many doctors are like, okay, I'm willing to do it at low doses for symptom relief, for specific symptoms. And that's where I land. And so I'm so grateful for the conversation, and yet the majority of women listening to this are probably, they're going to be hard pressed to find the doctor who's going to be willing.
And it might be a hard sell, to be perfectly honest. Let's face it, there's probably women listening right now who are going, those two ladies are nuts, and no way do I want to do that. And that's fine. All we say is, we ask, consider reading the book and then make a decision based on that, because what you're being told likely isn't the complete story. And so, sit back and just sit with the information. I think right now we're in this kind of comfort crisis in our country, and we only sit with what makes us feel comfortable. And Maria and I are just asking ladies to get maybe a little uncomfortable with the topic, to think about it differently, and just make sure that they're not just sort of purchasing what their doctor is selling, but instead are making decisions for themselves.
And I'm just going to throw this in, Kristin. I don't think we've ever actually discuss this, but I know you're going to agree with this. So the vast majority of women are going to be, say, put on a patch to start, and usually daily 100 milligrams of progesterone. Again,
Yep.
not bad, right? But also what's going to happen, either due to the estrogen component, let's just say they start on the mid dose of the patch, right? What is it, 0.05?
0.05. It's going
Right.
to be,
Okay.
Most women are
that's going to
still
be
getting
my
the point
dosage.
oh 0.025.
Well, but
yeah,
stay
it's
with
got to be a minimum. I know, like for me, I'm going on 0.05, and in the that is, they start everyone there like that.
okay.
They won't ratchet
So
up until
It's
you're
the
cycling.
highest they'll start them at. A lot of them still
The
get
highest,
started lower. Yeah.
You're cycling progesterone, but like, let's say it's going to take a postmenopausal woman who's given that 0.05 and daily progesterone. Okay. There is a likelihood, whether it's due to the fact that she's not cycling progesterone or it's just the estrogen stimulation of the uterus, that she's going to bleed. Okay. So here's what's going to happen. Most likely, maybe after she gets the ultrasound or what have you, she's going to be switched down to a lower dose of the patch because of the bleeding. Okay. She's still taking the daily progesterone. And so she's going to go from like a fairly low dose to an even lower dose. And whether or not that solves the bleeding is an unknown. But I just feel bad about that happening to women because, at 0.05, and again, now, Mariza, I'm talking postmenopausal women.
Yep.
That's a low dose.
Yep.
Probably, if she's even lucky, yielding like a 50 picogram type level. And now when she goes down even lower, maybe she's going to be 30. That is a postmenopausal level of estradiol. So that's just another thing I wanted to throw in there. So why don't we use like a little bit more robust dosing and cycle progesterone and schedule the period? But then again, maybe this is a wish that we can have like 10 years from now to bring more doctors on board to thinking like this.
Well, I'm grateful we're having the conversation. And again, obviously, in this world of allopathic medicine, it's symptoms are dictating this, right? And once we get rid of your symptoms, you're good to go. And that is what's happening, outside of, functional doctors or doctors who just have a better sense of things and are really trying to work towards that physiological level where we're actually preventing cardiovascular disease, neurodegeneration, bone loss, and general urinary syndrome. Like, yes. And all the other metabolic issues. Yeah. Microbiome problem. Yeah. All the things. I mean, the list is endless, honestly, systemically. Is it so if we're even playing in the arena of just symptom relief and we're not even looking at hormones, God forbid we test for anything because that is so unnecessary, supposedly. And if symptoms are good, we're good. Right. And so is that, I know it's not enough, but can it kind of be enough? If a woman's like, well, at the very effing least,
well, that's what
can I just get my symptoms managed?
Yeah. If that's what she wants, then that's fine for her. Right. If she really just cares about getting rid of hot flashes, Kristin and I are not here to judge, right?
I know.
What you should want from your HRT. We're just here to teach.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. And if you just are not into whole body health and vitality, a lot of women are, but let's be real, not all are. They just want to, they just see it as a drug to manage the symptoms. Then interestingly enough, it doesn't take a lot of estrogen to do that, to manage symptoms.
Yeah. I think the thing why we want women to get a little uncomfortable with the topic and start to think about it and, start to maybe question the narrative that's out there is because Maria and I have done this for a long, long time. We've worked with thousands of women, and what breaks our heart the most, not just our own mothers, but the 60 to 65-year-old woman who literally went into it having really good lifestyle foundations. She was strength training, she was eating well, she was out in nature, she had community, like all the things that really can maintain some sense of vitality for us as we age. And she maybe was on a patch to suppress a hot flash. It probably wasn't lubricating her vagina enough that sex was happy. And that probably degraded some of her relationship issues with the husband. But, they're dealing with it. They feel like, okay, it's just part of aging. And then she gets to 62 and she realizes she just has a broken ankle from walking on the golf course with her husband. This happens. And gets a bone scan and she's got holy bones now. Those women are the ones that we fear the most, because not fear from working with us, but fear for their kind of outcomes. Because once you finally encounter the long-term effects of not having optimal HRT, it's often too late to stop it. And so this is stop the effects. So, once we have plaque deposited in our coronary artery, not going anywhere. Now, all we're trying to do is plug up the dam, right? And prevent it from bursting. We don't want to get any women to that point. This is why we're trying to get them to think about this right now. Because like Maria said, not a lot of estrogen needed to suppress a hot flash or, maybe help you sleep or whatever. But when you get diagnosed with diabetes, and we have women whose, I think we need to have this conversation, their vaginal tissues are so tight. And these doctors have been maybe giving them like local estrogen, and that might help a little lubrication and maybe it's not so uncomfortable. But we have women who literally cannot walk comfortably because the movement of their pelvis walking, they're tearing their vaginal tissue. It's really going to be hard to reverse that. And that is a life-changing consequence of estrogen deficiency. But their hot flashes were suppressed. So they were told they were on enough estrogen and they were given a little vaginal estrogen and it helped them with lubrication. But it wasn't systemic enough to really protect these other body parts. And then the crap hits the fan and they're feeling lied to. And that's all we're asking is like, don't wait until you wake up and realize that you now have some really life-altering things that you have to deal with. And, people say it won't be me because I've been healthy and I've never been overweight and I strength train and I do these things. And, we have some people out there, some of the influencers who are like that are usually lying. They are taking hormones and they're doing things that they're not admitting to. But the ones who get there, they're like, I did everything I was told to do and it still happened to me. And the statistics show, I think it's like 70-year-olds in the United States take an average of like 8 to 12 prescription medications. Are we really not suffering with estrogen deficiency and hormone deficiency if that fact is real? So that's the part that Maria and I say is like, sure, a little bit might be good enough. And you might be thrilled with the lack of hot flashes, migraine control, whatever. But do you have a, crystal ball to look into the future and ask, what do you want then? It's not about always right now. So that's where we just want women to think differently. It's like, whatever's working right now is great, but is it going to protect you long term?
Yeah, I love this conversation. I love the disruption. I know that we are a ways away from really getting women to where they need to be. Even in like I said, in my own personal journey, you look at my metabolic labs, you look at my inflammatory labs, they are a chef's kiss. They're an optimal range. And was I still struggling with severe symptoms of hormone deficiency, or to some degree, like at least, insane fluctuation? Yes. And there was no amount of blood sugar regulation or sleep optimization or circadian rhythm or all the things I do every day to mitigate all the kind of deficiency issues I was dealing with. And I'm technically of age and of cycle, not a candidate for estrogen yet. I'm just not. And so I'm already going against the grain in a way, because I definitely wasn't going to my own many doctors and saying, hey, I need estradiol. They would have just giggled at me anyway and been like, let's try a migraine medicine.
Right. Yeah. Here's some Zomax or Zomig. Yeah. I mean, and I would say that for the ladies listening, I know right now some of the percolating comments and some of the women's thoughts are, where do we even find a doctor who's willing to do that?
Yeah.
Right. And that's one of the things that we try and give like a little roadmap of in the book, is to say, there are questions and terms that you can ask of providers to see whether or not they have the same goals for you that you have for you. And that's the number one thing that we should all be cared about, is matching a doctor to our own goals, not their specialty or their way of practice. And so that piece of it, there are ways, whether it's interviewing doctors, whether it's talking to certain pharmacists, that sort of thing, women can find this out. And right now, you're right. Nothing's going to change probably for the foreseeable future, but that doesn't mean we're all stuck in this place. We just have to be our own advocates and work a little bit harder to find what we're looking for. I mean, you've done it, Maria and I did it. There's physicians out there that have been practicing this way for 30 plus years. They do exist. We just have to hunt them down a little bit.
Yeah. No, I mean, I do believe that if there, everything's figure outable. if there's a will, there's a way. I mean,
Right.
there is a way to get what you need. And if there's anything all of us have learned as women is that we have to advocate for ourselves and we have to figure it out. And thank God we use our brain more than men. So I think we can definitely figure it out.
We use this brain more.
We want to maintain that to that brain level. Okay, so we can get the book on it's available everywhere books are sold. Yeah. Get it where you get it. I can't wait to have it. I know I have the hard copy, but I'm excited to have it on Audible too, as well. And so go and grab your copy. At the very least, just again, education and knowledge is empowerment. We all deserve to at least understand what our options are and to understand, how good it can be. So that's why I say go and get the book. Yes, it's going to stand against some of the other books that are out there. Yes, but what I love about you too is that you're fighting the real fight for what women truly deserve. And don't we all deserve it all? We deserve to have it all, especially in the second half of our life. And so I want to say thank you. Thank you for writing the book. Thank you for being out there. Thank you for going to battle. Thank you for having this conversation today.
Thank you. Thanks for having us and helping amplify it.